One of the most challenging parts about interviews is you just don't know what questions they are going to ask you most of the time. But that shouldn't stop you from being able to prepare. In today's video, I'm going to give you 5 different stories that you need to be able to tell during an interview, because the reality is the 5 stories I'm going to share with you are going to be able to answer a handful of questions that otherwise you wouldn't be able to prepare for. Let's go. Storytelling is incredibly powerful, and it's no different in interviews. Now, as we go through these different scenarios and stories that I want you to be able to share with the person interviewing you, a good practice might be to write them down or type them out in the computer and then write your responses. Not that you want to come off as overly rehearsed, but it's really important to write down all the details you feel make sense to communicate. Now, if you're able to quantify your impact in these stories, that's even better. Meaning if you could assign like a dollar amount to it, or an efficiency created, or just some tangible measure to show the person interviewing you that the story you are relaying to them made a positive impact for the business, that's additionally helpful. So let's get into the different stories I need you to be prepared to tell for your next interview. Now, the first one is your single biggest career achievement. Now, I am a recruiter by trade, and I've been in the recruitment industry for around 14 or so years. And one of the questions I have asked over and over and over again is, what is your most significant career achievement? Now, recruiters ask this for a lot of reasons. We want to see, what have you done? What are the big things you've done? What do you consider to be big? Are you good at relaying why this was impactful? Tell us all the details, right? So it's a great question, and it's a question that you will probably be asked if you interview with any frequency often. So obviously you want to think about what this is, because you can use this answer to answer so many stories, right? What's your biggest career achievement can answer a litany of questions. If you know what that story is, it can answer that question, but it could also answer, a question like, can you tell me about a time you made a decision with a significant impact, right? In that story, you made a decision that made a significant impact. You could also answer a question like, can you tell me about a time that you led a project that had a positive outcome? Well, in the story, you might have been leading a project. So the reality is, knowing the answer to this question is going to equip you to answer a variety of other questions. Hey, if you're finding value in this video so far, do me a favor and hit that like button. It is free and it tells YouTube that I don't suck. And if you decide not to click it, then you are telling YouTube I suck. The choice is yours. Oh good, you're still here. So the next story I want you to be prepared to tell is your least successful project. Now, it's funny that I might bring this up, but the reality is, it is very common for people to ask in an interview, okay, tell me about your least successful project, or tell me about a time that you failed, or tell me about a time you wish you did something differently. And if you have this story ready to go, you're going to be able to answer this. It's funny because a lot of people struggle with this. People do rehearse the successes they've had and talking about the impacts and the projects they've led, but very rarely do they come equipped to talk about things they wish they could do differently. And in that moment, if you haven't rehearsed it, if you don't know what it is, the likelihood of you delivering that story in a way that puts you across as somebody who is, someone who has learned from it, somebody who has humility, isn't as strong. Knowing what that is, knowing what you will go with if something comes up, it's going to make you come off so much better. This is just one of those things where it's a hard question because people aren't ready to answer it because they don't spend a lot of time thinking about their shortcomings. So always have this one. The next story I want you to be able to tell is, I want you to be able to tell a story about the time you learned something on the job, right? This one's really important because there are so many different roles in which when you come in, you're going to need to learn. Very few are, leaving one role, going to another, it's exactly the same. There's usually some sort of learning that has to occur, whether it's a process, the way the new company does it, a system, etc. So having a story prepared where you can talk about how you learned something, the way you go about doing that, like what is your process for learning something new, and just a variety of different ways that you get ramped up is incredibly important. Most people don't spend any time preparing for this either. You've all learned something in your career. I know I've learned many, many things. But when people go to interview, they don't spend any time thinking about, okay, how would I convey my learning process in this interview? Because they just don't think it'll come up. So being ready puts you an advantage. The next story you need to be able to tell is a story about disagreement. Most of us have had a disagreement with a boss, disagreement with a coworker, disagreement with a direct report. And those situations often come up in the forms of an interview question. Can you tell me about a time you disagreed with your boss and you had to convince them that your approach was best, right? That is a question you could be asked. They could ask you, tell me about a time you disagreed with a coworker. How did you go about resolving your issue? That is another very common behavioral interview question. And having a story about a disagreement in the workplace and how you handled it appropriately in a measured, calm, and analytical way will always serve you to have it teed up when it comes up in an interview. This next story I want you to have teed up and ready to go is a story about a time where you had competing deadlines. It is one of the most classic, common behavioral interview questions ever. Can you tell us about a time you had to deal with competing deadlines? Yeah, that is something you will get asked if it's a job where you have to wear multiple hats or juggle multiple projects or anything like that. So having a story where you had competing deadlines is great because there are actually more than just that question that you can use that story to answer. But having that story prepared, being able to talk about that situation, you're going to be able to use it for a variety of different interview questions, and if you have it ready to go, you're just going to come off as much better when that situation arises, when you have to answer any of those questions. Now, having stories like this is really, really powerful. It's going to make you immediately be a better candidate, but if you truly want to be the best candidate possible, and you want to do it in the least amount of time, you should watch this video here. This video here is a video I made about the fastest way you can improve as a candidate. It's not a secret, it's not a hack, but it is something that absolutely works. So I am done here, but I will see you over there.